Susan Makore, media expert from Zimbabwe. Welcome to Kenya and welcome to the JSO interview.
Thank you very much, John.
Might I begin by asking you quite simply to explain what it is that makes you a media expert in your own words?
Thank you. I've worked in the media for the past 15 years. I have been a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe. I have led the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation as head of television for 3 years as its CEO. I have worked with the national broadcaster for over 6 years. Then when I left there, I was in charge of the biggest production house in the country, Mighty Movies. And now I am a group managing director of companies that are in production, television production, and also the group happens to own the only private radio station in Zimbabwe.
A wonderful sort of kaleidoscope of experience there. I would like to ask you, there are many social problems that we confront with the media, one of them being who gets to broadcast what. So could you draw us on a line of thinking about rules and regulations in Zimbabwe? And by inference, we'll see how different or the same they are as to Kenya. Who gets licenses?
Well, I want to assume anyone who applies and qualifies to get a license would get a license, and obviously limited by frequency spectrum issues. In Zimbabwe, we have a scenario where there are not that many radio licenses that are up for grabs in terms of national. My understanding is that the maximum number of radio licenses that can be issued currently under the current analog system, the number is up. So currently, I can just give you a scenario where you have 3 owners of radio stations. There is the government-owned Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation. That one owns 5 radio stations. Then there is Zimpepers Group. That one owns 1 radio station. Then there is AB Communications that owns 1 radio station. So that gives you a scenario in terms of the maximum number of national licenses that are available.
But I'm interested to hear that whoever wants receives. I don't think that's quite the Kenyan situation, because there's a vetting scenario that comes about, in the sense that broadcasting media is in some way linked to politics, is in some way linked to the dissemination of some. Do you have this idea of censorship pervading all your broadcasting in Zimbabwe?
Well, I suppose Africa being Africa, obviously, I think we have all borrowed from each other in terms of regulatory frameworks. You will find out that even in Zimbabwe, there are certain parameters that one must follow. Obviously, frequency spectrum is a finite resource. So on the basis of that, there are, requirements that are there, and you will get a lot of people applying for 1 or 2 licenses that are available. But at the end of the day, the best person or the best proposal, the best presentation is the one that will be licensed. You can have 5 or 6 of them qualifying to be licensed, but because you probably only have 2 licenses up for grabs, that's what will be issued.
You mentioned earlier, yes.
So yes, the issues to do with political affiliations and connections, and those will always come into play in any country. Even if we are not even talking about Africa, even if we go overseas,
right,
you will see that, even if it's Rupert Murdoch, you hear that, they support this and that, and they get this and that because they support a particular political party.
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, it is allowed to support whatever political party you want to support. But at the end of the day, let it not be in question that whoever gets to get the license gets it on merit. not because they have some other political affiliation. So at the end of the day, the license must be awarded to the best idea, an idea that wins at the end of the day.
You mentioned the word analog versus digital, the great technological advance. Where is Zimbabwe in this game?
I think it's not secret that Zimbabwe has suffered, through various challenges over the past 10 years. Most of them to do with a political situation that then touched on economic aspects, and also aspects to do with various restrictions or sanctions, as they are called. But at the end of the day, you then have to look at a scenario where Zimbabwe, as part of SADC, is governed by a certain roadmap towards digitalization. There's a current roadmap that's there, that by end of this year, there should be digital migration, but that has to do more with television. And then by 2015, all our broadcasting in terms of television must be digital. But in as far as radio is a medium that we expect will be analog for some time to come. But what the technological jump does in terms of digitalization for radio, it then opens up avenues to have many more radio stations than what we are currently talking about. So it means that in the short term, we won't even be talking about being limited. It means you can have multiple services under one service, which we have. So instead of speaking of 8 radio stations in Zimbabwe, we can talk 80, we can talk 100. I know here in Kenya you have a lot of radio stations. So I think you are looking at a scenario where you are saying technologically, we will not be limited by issues of this spectrum, because digitalization will enable that the multiplication of the radio stations.
Let's go off at a tangent, for example, and look at the idea of content. Content in terms of what the masses actually take away from broadcasting. Let's go to radio first of all, and then head to television in terms of visualization. You know that in our cases to the International Criminal Court, one of the persons who is to face trial is accused of having spread hate speech through his radio broadcasts. Is this a particularly Kenyan situation, or do you face the same problem, and are there regulations to stem it in Zimbabwe? On the understanding always that Zimbabwe represents the great Shona Ndebele face-off. That's what we understand. Is this imagined or real, and are people being stifled at one end and encouraged on the other?
I think for Zimbabwe it's simpler, because we have a very clear I would say we have a very clear piece of legislation that guides broadcasters. That's one. Secondly, it's easier because, like I said earlier, you're talking about three owners.
Right.
So because you're only talking about 3 owners, there is less jostling and fighting for space and so on. So maybe the market is a little bit more stilted, not as aggressive as probably you would have here. And I think because of the fact that one is 100% government, the other is 50% government, and one private, you are looking at a situation where in Zimbabwe, each media house, radio-wise, has got a particular focus. And in that particular focus, they're comfortable in their space. And when you look at the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe, it has set parameters that broadcasters follow. And maybe, I'm sure here you'd also have a regulatory framework, but maybe in Zimbabwe it's just that, it's a smaller market, and broadcasters tend to really live within those parameters.